Hi everyone. In this video, I'm interviewing Cathy Mueller, the Executive Director of Mapping Your Future, a nonprofit organization geared towards helping students navigate the student loan process. Today, we're speaking about how to get a student loan. Cathy, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
So there are two branches of student loans, which are federal loans and private loans. Let's start with federal student loans. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. So federal student loans are loans that are administered by the federal government. So these loans help students pay for the cost of an education. It could be an undergrad student or a grad student. In addition, there are parent loans available to help parents pay for the cost of an education as well. The most common federal loan is the direct student loan program, and that's what most students receive. Now, as long as a student meets the basic eligibility requirements and they're attending an institution that participates in the federal financial aid program, they can receive a federal student loan. And one of the great things about federal student loans is there's no credit check. So a student doesn't have to prove credit worthiness in order to receive a federal student loan.
Great. So can you go into a little bit more detail about how students get federal student loans?
So the first step for any student to get a federal student loan is to complete the free application for federal student aid. It's also known as the FAFSA. And it's important to do that because not only are they applying for federal student loans, or at least determining their eligibility for federal student loans, they are also determining their eligibility for any need-based aid. And they certainly want to be considered for that as well as student loans. In addition to completing the FAFSA, there may be a loan application and there will be a promissory note that the student has to complete in order to receive federal student loans. And then finally, the school will ask the student to complete an entrance counseling session. That entrance counseling session will explain all about the federal student loan, and it'll have the terms and conditions and maybe even help them with budgeting as well. So it's important that they complete that because the school will want to have them complete that before they disperse the loan.
Great. So how much money can students borrow in federal student loans? And is the amount of money that they borrow up to them?
So it's not really up to the student as far as the limits, but the student can always borrow less than what they're allowed to borrow. So in that sense, it could be up to the student. But the limits vary based on the year that the student is in school, as well as whether or not they're a dependent or an independent student. So an independent student can borrow a little bit more because they are considered independent because they don't have parents to rely on to help them pay for the cost of their education. So the amounts vary anywhere from at the beginning of an undergrad dependent student, $5,500, all the way up to $12,500 annually. There are also aggregate loan limits. So for example, a dependent student can't borrow more than $31,000 in federal student loans over the lifetime of their undergrad education.
Great. So when do students have to start paying back their federal student loans?
So anytime a student graduates or drops below half-time or withdraws, that really triggers the beginning of a grace period. And so students have a 6-month grace period before they need to begin paying back their student loans. They will get notification from a federal loan servicer that they're in their grace period, and they'll get the date that that repayment will begin. So if a student has a grace period ending and they feel like they can't repay their loan because perhaps they haven't found a job yet, or perhaps they're not making the amount of money they need to make in order to make their student loan payments, they should contact their servicer and see what options are available, because with the federal student loan program, there are some repayment options that will help spread out their payments or lower their payments.
Great. So students also have the option to take out private loans. If a student
Mhm.
wants to take out a private student loan, how can they do that?
So I recommend that students contact the financial aid office at their school if they're interested in a private loan, and that's certainly something they should do. They can also contact their own lender. They don't have to use any lenders on a lender list at a school. They can contact their own lender, but they'll have to check with their lender to make sure they're working with that institution as well. There will be other loan applications for the student if they are considering a private loan. And in addition, there will be a credit check. Unlike the federal student loans, the student will have to prove credit worthiness. That's sometimes a challenge for students, and so what they may have to do is have a co-signer. Basically, a co-signer would guarantee that they're going to pay the loan if for some reason the student cannot repay it. So it's important to remember there are a lot of differences between federal student loans and private student loans.
Great. So when would you advise students to take out private student loans?
So I would advise students to only consider private student loans after they've exhausted all other sources of what we call free funding, and that would be grants and scholarships. Also exhausted all of their federal loan eligibility. And then also, I would recommend that they look at their state government. There are state governments out there that have state student loan programs that offer very attractive benefits for students as well, very comparable to the federal student loan program. So they might want to make sure they're taking advantage of all of those programs first before they consider any private student loans.
Great. Well, thanks, Cathy, for joining us today.
Thank you.
If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And for more interviews like this, please subscribe. Have a great day, everyone.